And unfortunately, even still, you have departments around the country that are dealing with stuff that are hunkering down and shutting the blinds and locking the doors. It's like, you are just going to make it worse.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
40 feet, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy, running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
Trouble, we have shots fired, shots fired. Give me backup now.
Because no one else is coming.
Screen, I have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down. Suspect is down.
This is the Squad Room.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room podcast, where we learn how to serve, strive, and succeed in our challenging careers as first responders. My name is Garrett Tesla, and I'm a full-time sergeant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm on a mission to build a world where first responders wake up inspired, feel confident at work, and go home safe, knowing they've spent their time in a worthy cause. If this is your first time listening to the show, thanks for joining us. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there these days, and I'm honored you chose to spend some of your time with us. Just don't forget to save and subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of the great episodes we have planned in the future. All right, my guest today is Nick Metz. Nick is a retired chief of police from Aurora, Colorado. Aurora is the third largest city in the state. Before coming to Aurora, as the new chief, Nick spent over 30 years with the Seattle Police Department, where he rose to the rank of deputy chief before being demoted. And we talk about that demotion in this episode. During his time in Aurora, Nick made international headlines when one of his uniformed on-duty officers was found driving drunk on duty. You've probably seen the video, and it's awful. But Nick stood by this officer and refused to fire him despite the public outcry and the heat that he got from the media and the politicians. Nick saw that this officer was hurting, and he knew that firing him would not be the solution. Nick was also chief when Aurora officers shot and killed Richard Gary Black, which led to widespread protests, and also the shooting of Elijah McClain, which 3 of his officers, timely that we are doing this episode now, 3 Aurora officers were just indicted on that shooting this week. And that's just what he did when he was at Aurora. With over 30 years in Seattle, he saw a whole lot there too. Nick is now working with his wife, Sarah, at Code 4 Counseling, where he teaches wellness and peer support programs around Colorado. He's also a board member of the Colorado Fallen Hero Foundation, which supports agencies and families in the immediate aftermath of losing an officer. It's an amazing organization. Nick is pursuing a master's degree in military and emergency responder psychology, which is a brand new field of study and a one-of-its-kind program at Colorado State University. Now, before we get to the episode, I want to thank our sponsors that help make this show possible. This episode is sponsored by OfficerPrivacy.com. In the age of the internet, social media, and smartphones, there's so much information at our fingertips. I can research any topic or person that I want to, and I can learn all about them, their family, way more information than I really should be able to. The problem is people can do research on us too. Whether we like it or not, our information is on the internet, and it's out there for anyone to find. Just accepting this and doing nothing isn't an option. We as cops have a giant target on our back these days. Sometimes that's literally, and it's a life or death issue, and other times it's just dealing with potential harassment. Either way, we don't want to expose our family to any of those risks. Being careful about what you post on social media doesn't go far enough. It's easy for a bad guy with an iPhone and free Wi-Fi to hunt you down. That's why OfficerPrivacy.com exists. My friend Pete James is the founder, and he spent 25 years in law enforcement here in California, much of that time doing forensic computer work, hunting down criminals and evidence on computers and on the internet. Pete knows how easy it is to find you, and since he's one of the good guys, he can help. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up the internet. Their premium service, which I use, allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work, where they will work to scrub the internet's top 30 people search sites that can expose your home address. They will then work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those sites. If you show up again, they will remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability. Using their proprietary software, you can remove yourself and your family members from these same top 30 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you like to make sure that you haven't been added back. Because here's the sneaky part. You think you delete yourself from the internet, but in fact, you will reappear on those same people search sites in about 30 to 60 days if you're not diligent. To learn more about how you can stay safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. Pretty cool deal. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room. This episode is also sponsored by Hard to Kill Fitness. This current pandemic we're in, God, it keeps going. It's changed the game on how we manage our health and fitness. And for those of us who are in a tactical athlete profession, we don't have a choice. With gyms across the world shutting their doors again and good fresh produce in short supply again, we really need to take ownership of our routines when it comes to our fitness. A lot of you have been left scrambling to replace a gym routine or something that you can do from home. Others of you might already have a home gym, but you're looking for something more structured that can help you stay in shape and be ready for the fight. Well, this episode is sponsored by Hard to Kill Fitness, and I think they have a solution for many of your problems. Hard to Kill is run by a team of military veterans and active duty police officers who offer simple yet highly effective and proven functional training workouts you can do at home or at the gym. Their routines focus on basic equipment and fundamental movements so you don't have to learn how to do Olympic lifts or complex movements. Hard to Kill Fitness develops workouts specifically for the demands of the military and first responder communities, and their goal is to prepare you physically and mentally for the challenges we all face in the streets. Each workout comes as a PDF and includes detailed descriptions of the movements in each workout, tips on mindset, and a progressive path that builds on the previous work you've put in. You also get access to the private Facebook group, and you can interact with the coaches there, or by email, or by Instagram. Check them out at hardtokillfitness.co or on Instagram at hardtokill_fitness. All right, now on to the episode with Chief Nick Metz. Nick Metz, welcome to the squad room.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Garrett.
Honored to have you here. Your history in policing, and I was telling you this right before I hit record. I wanted to have you on to talk about a particular incident that happened when you were chief of Aurora PD. Mm-hmm. But as I learned more about you and learned your story, I just found so much value in your experiences. And one of the goals and objectives of the squad room is to use the lessons learned by other officers, the people who've gone before us, so that we can avoid the same mistakes. We can identify some of those pitfalls. We can see the red flags, or we can see the opportunities.
Right.
And your long career, over 30 years, rising from line level officer to assistant chief at Seattle, and then transitioning to chief of police of Aurora, you have a lot of lessons you've learned in your career. So thanks.
Yes, I have.
So thanks for being here. And one of my goals for our conversation today is to ask you some openly, I don't want to say challenging, because there's never a gotcha question in this, but just like I want to dig into it a little bit,
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot to learn. And I wanted to start with what I imagine would be one of the low points of your career, and I could be totally wrong, but from the outside, in 2011, Seattle was in the middle of this consent decree over what was found to be or believed to be excessive use of force, or a pattern of excessive use of force by officers and other issues. And you were part of the command staff that had to agree to a consent decree by the Department of Justice, which included an outside monitor and all sorts of other things. And as part of that initial reaction to that, you had a very tough choice to make, put to you by the interim chief at the time, which was take a demotion or take a severance package.
Right.
And I'm curious what your thought process was. And I know I'm like starting in the middle, which is probably the exact wrong place for an interviewer to start. But to me, that's where the meat and juice of it is. That process of accepting the demotion and feeling you must have felt some sense of injustice for yourself in that. And in fact, just a couple months later, you were reinstated by a new interim chief. But can you talk about that time in your career and how challenging that must have been? Because I think a lot of us, we don't get the promotion we were looking for, or we feel like we got passed over, or we feel like we're not part of the in crowd or the good old boys. So I think a lot of us can relate to that in some way. But what was that time in your life like?
Yeah. Well, let me make just one little correction.
Please. Yeah.
The real low point for me in my career was actually 2009, between October and December, we lost 7 cops in 8 weeks in line of duty,
including the Lakewood Four. Yeah.
Lakewood 4. And we can get into that part a little bit later, but that for me was really the defining time for me. Particularly, that is where I really began my passion and my journey for officer wellness, because I saw the impacts of what those deaths did, not only in my own agency but surrounding agencies as well. I mean, we lost an officer in an ambush. We had the Lakewood 4. Pierce County had a deputy that was killed just a mile or two from where the Lakewood 4 were killed. And then just shortly after that, we had a Grant County deputy who was T-boned by a Suburban going 90 miles an hour. And I was working with Behind the Badge at that time, which is a line of duty death response team for the state. So for 2 months, I was doing nothing but planning funerals and taking care of families and taking care of cops. And it was an incredibly difficult time. So I always want to make that correction, because I think it's easy sometimes to think when you have things that happen to you personally that, that would be that low point. So, and if we want to talk about that a little bit later, we can. I just wanted to put that out there.
Oh yeah, we'll come back to that. I think that's interesting.
But going to 2011, that was really difficult. It was one of those things where the philosophy of my career had been kind of my job is to kind of walk the tightrope, meaning on one side of the tightrope is really doing my best to stay connected and partner with the community and make sure that their concerns and their needs are addressed. And then also really doing my best to make sure that I kept good connection with the troops. And my philosophy had always been that I would never ask my troops to do something I wasn't willing to do. So I would go out on ride-alongs quite a bit, and I would call the balls and strikes as I saw them. When the demotion occurred, it was painful. Yes, I didn't feel it was right or just. But I will tell you, within about 24 hours, I knew I was going to be okay, and not from the standpoint of knowing that, okay, I'm going to get it back at some point. I just assumed, okay, I took the demotion, I went back to captain, but the people who got me through it were the troops. Within about 24 hours, I had over 300 emails from my internal cops telling me, "We got your back. We're sorry. You've been there for us. We're going to be there for you." That absolutely meant the world to me. And so when I took the captain and went to my new assignment, they gave me a choice of my assignment. I said, well, I'm going to go to traffic. And literally the morning I walk in, they had a party for me. It was a welcoming party. It was really cool. And so that told me, you know what, you've been doing the right thing by the troops. The community came out in force and made it clear to, the mayor and the interim chief at that time, and even the media, and so not that I ever expected it was going to come back to me, that I would be reinstated. But it told me at that point what was really important, and that my heart had been in the right place for how I led. And it was like, leaders don't always get their way either. And so sometimes you just have to take it on the noggin and just move forward. And that was my goal at the time, was to move forward. And I was fortunate that, as you stated, the interim chief who did this didn't last but about, I think, 5 or 6 weeks in that position before he was ousted, and then I was reinstated after that.
What there's a lot to dig into there, and I could talk a whole episode just on the things that brought you to that point. And maybe I'm already planning round 2 with you at some point.
That's okay.
Because I think a lot of us, regardless of whatever position we're in, and I make this distinction all the time on the show, that leadership has no rank, and that you may be a supervisor, you may be a manager, you may be command staff, but none of that makes you a leader. It's
Absolutely.
all about you as the person and your personal ethos and how you treat people. That's what makes you the leader. And there's plenty of managers who aren't leaders, and there's plenty of leaders who aren't managers,
Mhm.
But, as you went and you saw this reaction from the people that worked with you, that had your back and that supported you, um, what are the things that you did throughout your career to show them that you were that person, and that you had the right frame of mind, or that your heart was in the right place? Because I think a lot of people think they're doing the right thing, and they probably are, but they just don't know. And I bet they'd love to hear
Right.
that.
Right. It was a lot of different things, really. One was, again, that attitude of not expecting them to do something I wouldn't be willing to do. And so I always did my best to be as accessible as I could, going to roll calls, getting up at 2 a.m. and hitting the 3 o'clock in the morning roll calls, going on the ride-alongs, going on calls with them, backing them up on calls when when I saw an officer, pulling somebody over, and pulling behind them and doing those, just the small things.
Mm-hmm.
But also, as I said before, calling those balls and strikes. So advocating, when an officer did something right, I said it was right. I didn't, if an officer got into a shooting and there was no question that officer acted within the law and acted within the best, made the best decision possible at that moment. I would do press conferences and I would put it right out there that this officer did the right thing. And that ruffled feathers, right? They, some politicians and some in the community either wanted me to say they did it wrong, or if they did do it right, say it in a way where it was like, well, this was a tragic situation, and just kind of slide over the fact that this officer did it right.
Mm-hmm.
I made a comment one time in Aurora that got me into a little hot water, where we had a shooting, and a reporter during the press conference said, well, it was a toy gun, which actually was a replica of a real gun, and I said, look, if you point what looks like a gun at one of my officers, expect a decisive and aggressive or overwhelming response. And we're not going to sit there and wait to see if this thing turns out to be real. And so it's just really making sure we do that. The other part was, I was very high on officer safety, and I would put emails out about line of duty deaths that occurred around the country and some of the lessons that were learned from that, or putting information out about wellness, and just really trying to make sure, connecting to officers about what the importance, their number one priority, and my number one priority for my officers, and I made no bones about this, was to say that their number one priority is to go home at the end of shift emotionally and physically healthy. And I meant that. And so but I also had high expectations of my cops, and if my officers crossed that line, and the thing that I always looked for when it came to discipline and issues, I didn't look necessarily just at what the offense was. Yes, there are certain offenses that you don't get a pass. There's just nothing you can do. But the thing I always also looked for was, what did they do afterward? Did they own up to it? Did they go out of their way to make it right? Did they take ownership of it? Did they, and so, like, for example, had an incident in Seattle where an officer was caught on video making some pretty nasty racial comments to a suspect that he had on the ground. To this officer's credit, the next day, he and his attorney called a press conference. We didn't tell him to do that. And he emotionally apologized to the community about what he did. And then what he did is he went to different leaders throughout the community and apologized personally, and then took on a project for a social service organization to build a computer lab, where he bought all the lumber. This guy really went overboard. I don't want to say overboard, but he made it right, and the community respected that. But there were other segments of the community that said he should be fired, and I would have backed that up had he just said, you know what, screw you all. You know, I'm just I do what I do, and I'm not. But this was a guy who took ownership, and so I advocated for him to get. He got significant discipline, but he didn't lose his job. And I think that was, for me, thinking back on leaders that I had who gave me those little extra chances and, chewed me out, but then patted me on the butt and said, now get out there and do the job that we know that you can do. So I was fortunate to really have had some really good mentors over the years that kind of taught me the importance of trying to maintain that balance between police and the community. It's difficult, but
yeah. But I think what I gleaned from that is, for the frontline leader or a lieutenant or anyone of any position, the key issue there is that you stopped and you provided some personal interaction that may be minute, or it may just be from an officer safety perspective, but it's an indication that you care, right, about that person, or you care about the job, or you care about the department. And, one of the things I found about you, in preparation for our talk today, was that word kept coming up. Either you talking about how much you care, or people talking about you in the sense that you are the kind of person that just cares, that cares a lot. And that care even weighs on you to some degree. And you just, talked about it with 2009. And it's little things we can do to let our people know, stopping on the traffic stop. I mean, when I was a, rookie officer, I remember having like a lieutenant would stop on a stop, and it was only a handful of lieutenants who wore a gun belt, full gun belt. And those were the guys that you thought, okay, he's out there with me, or he's got my back.
Right.
Or just stopping someone in the hall and talking to them, knowing their names, doing the ride along so you know about them, or know about their family, know about their hobbies outside. You don't have to get up in someone's business necessarily, but you just have to know, they just have to know that you're there, and I think any cop, type A, we're all type A, everyone says that, but we always want to know that the support is at least at arm's reach, and that's all you have to do. And it's surprisingly simple, but it's also something that's so often missed. And oftentimes I think it's not anyone's fault necessarily. We're all overworked. We all have had our departments slashed and cut just through my area is still recovering from the 2008 recession. So, we lost a lot of officers,
right.
And the work didn't decrease. But I think what gets missed in a lot of that is that personal interaction and taking the time, because everyone's running from meeting to meeting and everyone's running from call to call, and no one's taking the pause to say, hey, what can I do for you? Or how are you? Or what are you struggling with right now? Any of those questions that we can ask. And now I'd like to go to 2009, since you brought that up. And I remember that, very clearly, how even down here in Southern California, how that affected us, and just reality of those 7 officers in such a short time frame, and all of us kind of shaking our heads. And of course the Lakewood 4 was terrifying to all of us. I remember we stopped going to get coffee for a long time as a result of that.
Well, and if you recall, I think just was it maybe 6 or 7 months before that, you had the 3 or 4 officers in Oakland that were killed. So it was a really bad year. It was
in short succession. Yeah. And then, that was a heavy time to put on a vest, and every day you put on that vest that year was a reminder of what was going on.
Absolutely.
And then, but to be part of that organization beyond the badge, and you do that now in Colorado with the Colorado Fallen Hero Foundation. In fact, you just helped plan and bury Boulder PD officer Eric Talley. That is taking on an extra burden that I know is a gift to others, but it's a burden to yourself. And then you still have your day job, you still have your family, all those sorts of things. What did you do in that time frame in 2009 to come out of that? To to either what were the resources you used, or the people you leaned on, or the books you read, or what was it that helped you get through that really
Yeah,
dark period?
it was really dark. For me, I during that whole period, I was in total business mode. It was take care of this, take care of that, take care of this, and my philosophy has always been, and has been as chief, is I'm the buffer, right? I try to be the buffer. Like, I'll take the hits, and I'm not trying to say that to pat myself on the back. I hope it doesn't come off that way, but my job is to, okay, I'll take the hits, let the folks do their job, and that's what you get paid the big bucks to do. um but during that 2009 period, it was really dark. And then after the Grant County line of duty death, and we going into January, I went into a real funk. And it wasn't anything like I felt suicidal or anything like that. That's when everything hit me all at once, all the grief, and just you know all that, because I put a lot of that aside during that 2 months. I didn't allow myself to really feel, and then it came to me and it hit hard, and I had to go get counseling. I went and got counseling, and then I started. We started noticing around the department that there were a lot of officers who were impacted by what had gone on, and unfortunately, were choosing unhealthy ways of coping. So we saw incidents of substance issues coming up. We saw DUI, we saw DV, we saw just a lot of things, and we weren't the only agency that was experiencing that. And so we started. That's where wellness really started, and I kind of felt like, well, you got to kind of tell your own story if you're going to get people to, because there's that whole stigma issue. And if people are worried that if I go to counseling or if I seek out peer support or anything like that, somehow or another, it's going to negatively impact my career. So to me, it was important to tell my story, to tell my troops. I was incredibly down. I was depressed. There were days where I'd go home and would just leak, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was like, why am I going through this? And going through counseling was a huge help. And so again, just being able to pass that message on to officers, like, go get the help. We'll support you. We're going to be behind you. And that, I think, really helped to kind of bring that stigma down a little bit. And we started to see the use of peer support and wellness start to increase a little bit. But I think when you're talking about leadership, it's one thing for a leader to say, if you need help, go to peer support, and we got department psych, and we got this and got that. There's still always going to be that suspicion that, well, okay, but if I use it, what's going to happen? So the leaders have to show some vulnerability and be willing to share that vulnerability with their troops, and talk about when they went through a period, whether it was a divorce or a sick child or whatever the case may be, and how that impacted them. Those agencies that I've seen around the country where their leaders do that, they're pretty healthy agencies, because their troops know that they can go get that help, and they're not going to be looked at cross-eyed by leadership. I had a situation, and I hurt my leg really bad a couple of years ago, and had a really bad experience with some pain meds within about the first 10 days. Unfortunately, I caught it, but I realized my body was quickly developing a dependence, and it really scared the crap out of me. And I wrote a letter to my troops to say, yeah, I didn't fall into a full-blown dependency here, but I came really close. And if I hadn't caught this in time, who knows where it could have led. And if you're experiencing this, or if you're going to go out in surgery and you're going to get pain meds, these are the things, and again, it's just being able to be willing to show that vulnerability. I love the fact that I could run into officers in the hallway, and hadn't seen them for a while, and say, how you doing? And they're like, I had a rough patch, and my wife and I were really, but I went to go get counseling, and I'm on some antidepressant meds, and I'm like, you're telling your chief, this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, what an honor that they feel that they can be vulnerable and know that they're not going to be judged for that.
I mean, that's almost hard to wrap my head around, that conversation that can be had in the hallways where it's so normalized and it's so routine to be able to talk about these things. And I think you're exactly right. It comes from telling your story and being vulnerable. And I think a key distinction there too is, it doesn't mean that the leader or the leader of the organization has to have gone through something turbulent or has to have gone through counseling in order to understand its impact for people, but they have to tell the story of why it's important for their team. Just like you send an email about why it's important to pay attention to opiates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have a leader at any rank who rolls their eyes at it or says, yeah, there's EAP, wink, wink, or I don't have a problem, but if you do, like that, any sort of tone can be very detrimental to
absolutely
how an officer takes care of themselves. And I think that, I know for a fact, because I hear it from officers all over the world, frankly, that they still exist in these vacuums where, strength is silence, that you suck it up, that you lose your badge and gun if you get counseling. And they have a really hard time believing even someone of importance like yourself in that position as chief who says, no, trust me, you're good. And then telling their own story. And, in your story, I think really the best example of that was the events surrounding Nate Myers, who was one of your officers in Aurora. And this made national news.
It was international. Let's just
international. My apologies.
That was a fun couple of weeks.
Oh my gosh. So the real short version of this is that he was one of your officers who was found unconscious or asleep inside of his patrol vehicle in the middle of the day, who was unresponsive at the time, and who was taken to the hospital, smelled of alcohol, and in the internal affairs investigation, he admitted to going home during his shift and drinking a bottle of vodka, and he was basically passed out in the middle of the street. And the body camera footage of the officers arriving on scene came out, which is what made it international news. But what really made it international news, and what I remember at the time, before I even really knew who you were, before we got connected up, was I remember that that chief of Aurora went to bat for that guy. And turns out it's you. But you got up there in front of the cameras and said, I'm not firing him. He has a condition that needs to be dealt with. He's owned his mistake. He has sought, he has sought proactive help in resolving this problem. He's a good person, and I want to treat the human being. I'm not, and basically saying I'm not firing him just to appease the people who are angry that he was drunk on duty. Did he do something wrong? Yes, but he's a human being. He deserves that respect. And I'd like you to talk about how. Was that a challenging decision for you, or was it an easy decision to make that then caused a lot of challenge? Like, how did that go?
No, it was a really difficult decision. So like a lot of places, before final discipline is imposed, they have an opportunity to come before the chief and Loudermill basically, and be able to give their side of things. And I'll be honest, when he walked in, even though I always try to not, even though I'm always trying to be very conscious that I have not made a final decision, I was really leaning towards, he's going to have to really tell me something here, because I'm really leaning towards termination. It turned out to be the longest Loudermill I've ever been in. And I can't go into details, obviously,
sure,
because it's a personnel issue. But what I can tell you was that this was a man who solidly took ownership of what happened. And I don't mean, and when I say solidly took ownership, he didn't, it wasn't one of those things where people can say, well, he was on body cam, what is he going to say? No, he took that personal ownership, and and was incredibly remorseful. Never once asked to keep his job, which I thought was, he didn't do the whole, if you keep me, I'll do A, B, and C. But outlined for me his journey, and his journey before that happened and his journey after that happened. And the work that he had put in to heal. And it was, I was like, wow. And so even after that, I wasn't convinced yet. I did a few more things and looked into a few more things. And I really wanted to verify his story, that he wasn't just, so I went to several folks who had a role in his new journey, if you will. And asked what he did, and these were very professional folks. These weren't these weren't just close friends of his or anything like that. And had a lot of sleepless nights, because I knew it was going to be a decision that was going to be challenged. And so made that decision. I ran it past the city manager, said, this is what I want to do, because I had that by law, or I had to be required to do that. They were like, okay, you're the chief. And made that decision. And, people can say, well, he should have been fired. He got a slap on the wrist. He did not get a slap on the wrist. I gave him just about everything I could hand to him, just shy of termination. He lost a lot of money and stature within the agency, from demotions and suspensions and all sorts of other things. And I don't, the one thing is, I never tried to convince anybody that my decision was right. I know that, there are chiefs out there who would have terminated him, and I think they would have had every right to. I think even after they had heard his story, they might have been like, and I get that. So I don't try to defend that decision necessarily. I don't try to say, well, I'm right and they're wrong. I totally respect people's opinions on that, and and I get that. But I think as you stated at the beginning, I wanted to really look at this as not. It's easy to make a decision to say, well, this is in the best interest of the department, or, this is the politically expedient way to go. And probably if I had done that, it would have been a blip on the radar. It would have been a one night news story. And, but I don't know. I just felt like this was someone who, again, I go back to what I said earlier, not just looking at the offense, but what did they do to make things right, and what did they do to ensure that nothing like that would happen again. And when all this broke, and all the attention and his name being out there, I thought for sure, if this doesn't get him to relapse, and I thought for sure he'd relapse, and he never did. He stayed strong, and despite his family being harassed by the media, him being harassed by the media, and all this kind of stuff. And I still feel, if I had to do it all over again, knowing that I'm going to get my butt kicked in the media, I would have done it again. I'd do it again.
After the riots and unrest of the summer of 2020, I began to get increasingly concerned about the fact that so much of my life is out there accessible to the public. I've been trying to figure out where that line should be drawn between what is shared on this podcast, on social media, or in interviews I give, and what should remain private for the security and safety of my family. Even though I'm a public person, that doesn't mean I want my personal information out there for the bad guys to find. I've arrested enough of them in my career that it makes me nervous to think my family could be exposed to those dangers. Not long ago, a suspect showed up at the front door of my partner's house 45 miles away from the station. I've had enough worry, but also I felt completely outmatched by the internet. I mean, it's the internet. Trying to take my name off of Google seemed insurmountable, and I learned that honestly, it is. But there's a lot we can do to protect ourselves, and that's removing our names from people's search sites and breaking the links between our home address and our names. I learned all this from my friends at officerprivacy.com, who are here to help me clean up the internet and the paper trail that is my life. A quick Google search shows a shocking amount of information about where I live, where I used to live, my family members, their names, their addresses, and even phone numbers. We need help protecting ourselves from the bad guys. You have partners on your beat, so get a partner on the internet. Check out officerprivacy.com for more information and learn how you can get started cleaning up the internet. Yeah, I think I want to go back to something I think that's really impactful that you said, which was that I think the assumption oftentimes in making a decision, and this is obviously I have my own paradigm I'm coming into any conversation with, which was, as sergeant. And so I am not that command staff, high echelon leader. But the assumption often is that you have to do what's best for the agency. And obviously that is something that needs to be considered. But I think the point is you always do what's best for the agency. Now, what that might be is what differs. And I think a lot of people think what's best for the agency is to get rid of the problem or to exercise that or excise that person or that problem. But there is a real detriment or a real impact that could have on the agency too, that may not be long-term the best thing to do. You get rid of the one person, but then everyone else might clam up or not come forward if they have a drinking problem or what. So it seems like your thought process there was really what's best for this individual officer is also what's best for the agency.
Right.
Go ahead.
I had a situation about a year or two before that where we had a high-ranking officer who was caught on video making some very, very offensive racial remarks. And I told you about the one in Seattle and how that officer handled it. This one was very different in that he never took responsibility for it. He never apologized. He never showed any sense of remorse. And I fired him because my feeling was you are that callous to understanding what you said and how that hurts not just the community, but how it hurts our agency and how it puts us in this light of, well, if a ranking officer can say this, and then what are the troops saying, right? And so for me, that was a very easy decision to make to say, no, you're not welcome here anymore because you took no responsibility, showed no remorse or apology.
And then, with that same idea of taking care of people, and when Nate Meyer, the who we were just talking about with the the DUI or the drunk on duty, he came to you with his vulnerability, which I thought was, and then you used a word that he was healing, and what a different perspective to take, that someone's healing from something or healing from a trauma versus paying their dues or the restitution of what you might do after you screw up at work, but to approach it as this idea that he's healing from something. Was this a perspective that you brought into this decision-making process because of what you went through in 2009 or through your own journey, understanding of trauma? And, I'm curious where you got to the point where your paradigm was that this officer needs to heal rather than this officer needs to rectify a wrong.
It's a little bit of both, to be honest with you, Garrett. I mean, it's not even really about admitting a wrong. It's more about taking the responsibility and maybe you can't right the wrong, but you are doing your best to make it right, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I'm explaining that very well. I think there's so many officers out there, especially now, that need to heal, right? There's something in their lives. We're all in there right now. There's something we've experienced in our lives, whether it's the trauma we've seen on the streets or personal trauma that we've gone through where we need to heal. And that's an important part. But I also, again, I really look at, do they really understand and embrace what they did and how, and what they did, the position it put people in, the position it puts them in, and then what are the things that they're prepared to do to not allow that situation to just fade away in vain. That let's use this as a learning moment and so forth. So it really came down to just really, again, really hearing his heart and what he was doing to make it right for a lot of other people, not just him.
So later that year, you announced your retirement. This is 2019. You announced your retirement. And again, one of the things that I found, chiefs have a short shelf life, in general. Like, you are subject to the whims of a city manager or a city council or a change in political attitudes or a new election, or there's a myriad of reasons why. I think the average chief lasts about 3 years. If that. Try
for major city chiefs. 3 years is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, just look, going back to Seattle, they went through 4 or 5 interim chiefs in a year, which is mind-boggling and has such a devastating impact down the line, I think. But anyway, to you lasted 5 years before you said, okay, it's time for me to transition and move on, and you left. And what I found interesting was, you don't get this very often, where your city manager praised you walking out the door, your unions at Aurora praised you walking out the door, said they, sad to see you leave. They wish they loved working with you. You even had the NAACP praise you as you walked out the door. And this is all during a time when Aurora had their own use of force incident with carotid restraint that, I don't want to say resulted in, it was part of the death of a suspect. And I mean, the city could have burned, and there was certainly unrest, and some protests, but I've never had the chance to ask a chief who had to go through such a civil unrest and such a flashpoint at a time when this is of course before George Floyd, but still very much in the same tone, in the same time of policing environment. Right. What do you think Aurora had, or that you had, that was able to demonstrate some trust with the community that it didn't burn to the ground?
Well, I think you kind of said it, demonstrated trust. We showed through our actions that we could be trusted. It wasn't just a matter of, we're the police, you can trust us. In any city, particularly in a major city like Aurora and larger, that having a relationship with your critics is incredibly important. And being willing to sit down with your critics, whether publicly or at coffee, and allowing them to, take you to the woodshed when they feel like that you need to be taken to the woodshed. We were fortunate that, like with the NAACP, they went through 2 presidents while I was there, and both presidents were outstanding. They were, my promise to them was I was never going to sugarcoat anything. I was never going to lie to them. Had them on speed dial, as well as other leaders in the community, but had them on speed dial. And so when anything happened, like if we had a controversial use of force or some controversial issue that may have involved someone from the African American community or the Latino community or anything like that, I would get on the horn with them right away, 2 a.m. if I had to, and tell them, this is what happened, and this is what I know right now, and this is what I can share with you, so that when their phone started ringing off the hook at 8 a.m. or they flipped the news on, it wasn't a surprise. But then we would keep them updated on the investigation. So we would have special meetings with them, And of course, we would tell them probably just a little bit more information than what we would typically share with the public. But we developed that kind of trust that we knew they weren't going to run out and burn us. And what was really great about the two presidents I worked with was that even though at times they would get pressure from the community to get out in front of the camera the day after something happens and blast the department, they didn't. They stuck to their word, which was, we're going to wait till the investigation is complete, and then we'll make our judgments. If you did wrong, we're going to kick your ass, and rightfully so. The other thing that we started doing, which I think really helped a lot in garnering trust with the community, was when we had an officer involved shooting or in custody death or anything like that. As soon as we could, one is we would hold a press conference as soon as possible, a formal, even if there wasn't a lot we could tell the media at the time, we would at least hold a press conference and explain all that to them. And I think that really helped. But the other thing we would do is we would bring the families in and we would let them see the body cams, and we would bring leaders in from the various, whether it was like the NAACP or the Urban League or the, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, but we would bring these leaders in and let them be part of that as well. And, it was very difficult meetings to have, very emotionally charged, but we wanted to make sure the family had an opportunity to hear and see where the investigation was going. We were always very careful not to do or say anything to try to make it sound like, we were in the right or whatever. That's up to them to make that decision, right? But it was, here's what we know, here's the body camera, and we would have our victim advocates there and everything else, because that could be emotionally charged. But again, it's that constant communication with those communities, particularly those communities who felt disenfranchised and not part of the overall, the overall public, if you will, for lack of a better term. And so I think, again, I learned a quote many years ago, and I used it all the time in Seattle, and I used it all the time in Aurora, and it drove my cops nuts. And the quote's from Maya Angelou, and it's, people may not remember what you said, they may not remember what you did, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. And I can't think of a better quote that epitomizes what policing is. And, and so even if you've got to give the worst news and the bad news and telling people that something they don't want to hear, hopefully they walk away knowing that, okay, well, at least they were honest with me.
Mm-hmm. I think people have an inherent understanding of, you have a job and you have obligations, or you have a perspective, but if you're honest about it, that it goes so far. Mm-hmm. What I am seeing now, I think we all see our department's really struggling with the idea of how much communication is enough, but not too much. And we're at a point with social media, especially, we're learning like you can't over communicate with your public. It's impossible.
You can't.
And, absent the need to keep something secret because of an investigation technique or something that, for considerations there is no benefit to not talking.
No. And unfortunately, even still, you have departments around the country that are dealing with stuff that are hunkering down and shutting the blinds and locking the doors. It's like, you are just going to make it worse. Mm-hmm. It's better to get rip the Band-Aid off, go through the pain, versus having something just drawn out for weeks and months. Especially then if it ends up that, well, the officers were in the right, and now you've put your troops through this hell, mm-hmm. where they're being threatened, their families are being threatened, and all these kind of things. And it says, just get the information out. We'll deal with the fallout as we go.
I want to jump back to something you just said too that I thought was really worth digging into a little bit, which was, do you need to have a relationship with your critics? Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of this audience, their critics are not directly the NAACP or the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. It's their maybe it's their lieutenant or it's their sergeant or someone else in the organization that they have had friction with, that doesn't see it the same way they do. And, that always leads to some feeling, not always, but often leads to feelings of either animosity or feelings like you are pigeonholed or that you've been labeled blackballed or whatever it is, right? How, as someone who's gone through literally every rank you can go through in an agency, how have you approached those conversations with your critics internally, or and also how have you had courageous conversations with people who need to change, but maybe don't see it, and not from an internal affairs perspective or national news, but just like hey, your career is going to be so much more successful if you do this instead of this. How do you have those courageous conversations at any rank?
Right. I think you just said it right there. I think when the frustration I've always had with leadership training is we spend a lot of time on theories, right? And, are you a participative leader? Or are you an autocratic leader? Or Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all these other kind of things, which you walk out of there going, well, that really didn't teach me much at all. Leadership training today really needs to be focused on the hands-on. How do you handle someone who's going through a death in their family? How do you handle someone who's going through a substance issue? If you're a supervisor, how do you handle, how do you handle the next year after a line of duty death? We've seen too many agencies where, well, the memorial's over. Now we're going to get back to normal. There is no back to normal. You will never get back to normal. There's a new normal, but it's going to take some people a while to adjust to that. And so, really teaching in most cases the first line supervisors, sergeants, who I don't say this tongue in cheek, are the most important rank in that department, because they are the ones who set the tone and have the greatest impact on folks. But really sitting down and saying, look, this is how you handle certain things. It's not to say you got to handle it A, B, C, D, E. Maybe you cut out a few letters, but give them that guide. Because again, I think part of the problem that we see today is a lot of leaders are scared to confront issues with their troops. And maybe scared is not the right word, but they're reluctant, and they're not doing that troop any favors. If anything, all they're doing is, if that troop is out there doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so I think in a lot of ways, agencies need to start holding, the first line supervisors a little bit more responsible. If Garrett, if you're a sergeant and you've got 10 officers who work for you, and in a year you've had 4 of your officers suspended for something, well, then is it really the officers or is it your leadership? Right? Mm-hmm. Because you look at all the other squads and they're like, well, we're fine. We're not having any issues. Well, then there's a common denominator there. Right. And so I think it's yes, you got to look at it's so easy today to say, we need to have all these policies for the cops, but we also need to hold the supervisors responsible to say, when something happens, one of the things I used to always say to sergeants is, you should have known, this issue this officer was dealing with wasn't something that just happened overnight. There was a progression here. There was something going on that all of a sudden they went from this professional officer now to all of a sudden coming in looking like crap, or, losing their temper on scenes, and yet you don't address it, or you just address it through punitive measures rather than just sitting down with them and going, what the hell's going on with you? What's going on at home? And let's start working on some things. Every officer I've ever talked to about this issue with stress, it's organizational stress that's the worst thing that they deal with. Officers who have been through shootings are like, I'm fine. I got to go through these steps to, as far as the investigation and everything else, but all the other stuff that the agency is making me do or putting me through is causing me more stress than that actual incident. And I try to be sensitive to that because I know I've created my share of organizational stress. You just, as a chief, you're just going to. I mean, there's
It's a
this thing.
byproduct. Yeah.
It's a byproduct. You're going to create some policy that people are going to be like, oh my God, or new procedure, or implement new training that everyone's like, oh, here we go again. So I know that I've caused my share of organizational stress. But as long as leaders understand that they are doing that, and then start working with people to say, okay, and explain why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just show up one day with a new policy and not really sit down with your folks. And if you can, involve your people in that policy development. We went through a whole use of force when I was in Aurora. Went through a whole new use of force reforms when I first got there. IA reforms. I could have just implemented that stuff and said this is the way we're going to do it. But what we did was we brought in stakeholders, meaning the cops. All right, here we have to do this, but let's figure out together how we make this work. And so then when it rolled out, yeah, you still had the naysayers, but overall people were like, no, we're invested in this. We were part of the decision.
Just comes back to communication, right? And the ability to communicate regardless of what level you're at.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me too when you say that I remember when I got promoted, and really the only advice I got, and this is no fault to anybody in the agency or anything, because it was just kind of the standard pat answer, was take care of your people and you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean placate them and try and cover for them? No, of course not. And it doesn't mean to create a barrier between you and the next rank up, and like, well, you want to weed things out, but you also don't want to create a wall.
Right.
It took a long time to figure out what that actually meant and what taking care of your people, the best things to do. And I think there are a lot of frontline leaders out there right now who we all go through the post mandated course when you get promoted. All right. I shouldn't even say all of us. Many states don't have any requirement, but most larger states or larger municipalities, you get promoted, you have to go through the course. But you're like you say, it's theory, it's how to fill out paperwork, it's the how to not get sued kind of stuff. It's not the how do you sit down with an officer and have a really courageous conversation about something very difficult,
right,
that they need to change.
And I love that example, because a lot of assessment centers for promotions have that as an exercise, right? You're going to sit down and talk to a problem officer, but you've never taught them how to do it. Yeah. And so, and then that just really kind of comes down to personality. Does that person just, well, that's just me, and that's how I would do it anyway. But then you potentially weed out some really good folks who never got that training on how to sit down and talk to somebody.
And so when you're on the other side of the chair, and as a chief, you've got, like you say, having a relationship with your critics, and you had plenty of criticism coming from the media and from community leaders, and throughout your career, you've had, I don't want to say conflicts, but you've had these conflict points or points of friction with people who have maybe been critics of you. I think we all have some version of that if you've been in the job for any length of time.
Yeah.
How do you have, what self-awareness do you have, or how do you personally, how do you decide if what they're telling you is true or not? How do you evaluate that for yourself?
If what the community is telling me is true?
Well, yeah. Or if you have someone telling you that, this about you particularly, or this about how you do things, or this about how you handle people, or how you make a decision is wrong. How do you evaluate that to say, okay, this person is giving me an input. I need to decide if this is true or not. Mm-hmm. And if it's true, I need to make a change. And if not, right, I need to disregard it. But there's a line, or there's a decision there. How do you do that?
I think part of it really comes down to is how are they coming at you with it, right? If you can tell that there's really just an agenda to, let me put it this way, like you go to a community meeting and or roll call. You go to a roll call and you have an officer who you've passed several times in the hall. You've tried to talk to them, and they're just like, and then during roll call, they decide, well, I'm going to try to embarrass you in front of the troops and take you on. And it's like, okay, well, is your motivation really to give me your feedback, or to try to embarrass me in front of, to show off to the troops that, you're taking the chief on, or the same kind of thing that happens in community meetings. It's like, for me, when I've always been fine with taking criticism, whether it's personal criticism or it hurts sometimes. I'm not saying I'm like totally fine with it, but I'm open to it. Or if it's criticism about an agency, but when someone comes and calls me and wants to sit down and is willing to have that one-on-one conversation with me, and there's no cameras, there's no audience, it's just you and I. Let's talk it out. That to me, I have a lot of respect for those folks. I really do. And I've learned a lot about my own leadership from officers and others who are willing to sit down and say, hey, what you said at this roll call or at this event or whatever, it kind of turned us off a bit, and I that kind of thing, and talking it out. And sometimes, a lot of times, I shouldn't say sometimes, a lot of times I'm walking away going, yeah, you know what? I probably could have done better. I think the other part is sometimes you got to be willing to apologize or say, you know what? I got it wrong. And saying that to your troops. When I was in Seattle, it was a funny situation, but I had written a note to a captain at a precinct about the fact that the numbers were down. I was on a quota day for whatever reason, and the numbers were down on tickets and this, that, and the other thing. And are these officers really doing anything? And so the captain, in a very passive aggressive way, posted my note on a billboard. And so I find out a couple days later that this precinct is just hot at me. They are pissed. And I was like, and so I had a choice. I could have ignored it, right? And at some point it probably would have just simmered down, but people also would have remembered that. Remember, we go back to that quote. So I end up going to every single roll call over a 2 or 3 day period at all hours. And I went in and I said, and I never put it on the captain. I never said anything about it. I just heard, I heard you heard this. And I said, you know what? That was not my best day. And you deserved better. And if I have an issue with what's going on, I should be coming down here and having those conversations with you directly. Because then what I ended up learning was there were reasons behind why the numbers were down. It wasn't just because they didn't want to do work. The call volumes were up, staffing shortage and all those kind of things that were impacting it. And so I think sometimes you got to be willing to eat humble pie and just say, that's not my best day. I'll learn from it. Do my best not to repeat it.
I want to transition a little bit to your specific tactics and strategies for how you have navigated. There's, like you said, there's organizational stress, which is consistently shown to be, as you mentioned, far more impactful than the acute stressors of a shooting or a traumatic event. But to get through a 36-year career intact and in good health, you have to have had or developed something or some strategies to help. I see, audience can't see this, but in the background I see a grand piano and a guitar. And so that, to me, I think of those outlets. What are the things that you have used throughout your career to remain centered as best you can?
That's a great question. One is really doing my best at times to just break away from the job, right? Every cop can relate to the fact that, and every responder, I mean, whether you're a cop, firefighter, paramedic, EMS, doesn't matter, military, you develop an identity, but then you have to realize I'm a chief here, but I'm a dad over here, and I'm a husband over here, and all the other responsibilities that I have on the other side. And so I really try to do a lot of things to take me away from the job. So coaching my kids was always important to me, different sports. Music was always an important part of my family. And so, the piano, the guitar, I'm just starting now to take sax lessons. But just being able to have those outlets and really not take myself so seriously is part of it. That's something you just have to learn over time. It's not something I can say start tomorrow, but you begin to realize, you know, and part of it for me, actually, I told you I had that leg injury. I was out for about 3 months, and I came, and I was coming in periodically, but I was out for about 2 to 3 months. Place kept running.
Shocker, right?
Yeah. Arrests were still being made. Tickets were going out. Everything was still moving along. And I'm like, they're doing fine without me. And to some degree, that was a little bit of, maybe it's time. Because I think you get in your head that if I retire now, the department's just going to go down in flames. And you realize, no, they're going to be all right. They're going to continue to do what they do. And again, just kind of trying to just be, again, doing your best not to wear, when you're off duty, not wearing your rank on your sleeve or the stars on your collar. It's like, there's Chief here, and then there's Nick over here. And I've got to be present when I'm Nick. I've got to be present for my wife. I got to be present for my kids, and my friends, and put the phone down, quit checking email. And that was hard, to do that. But I had to learn over time that, and being told by my kids, get the hell off your phone,
Yeah.
So,
Is there any, I think we have our routines at work, but often we miss an opportunity to implement routines in our off-duty time that might help us make that transition or make that distinction between who we are at work and who we are at home. Do you have any routines that you do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis to help you with that?
I can't say I have routines. I guess I just look for outside interests, again, the music, or whatever others out there have. And even if, people I'll take music, for example. People will say, oh, I'm 50 years old, 60 years old. How am I can't, it's too late to learn a new instrument. No, I taught myself to play the piano 10 years ago. It's just a matter of sitting down with it. So it's just really having to be intentional about breaking away from things. And, so whether it's woodworking or fishing or traveling and just really, again, it goes back to being intentionally present, which I think for responders, especially cops, it's hard because we're hypervigilant, right? Already. I mean, I'm going to guess even when you're off duty, you go to a restaurant, you're sitting in a particular place and you're wanting to make sure you have, the best view possible for safety reasons. And I actually had to start consciously trying to get out of that habit a little bit. Not that I was taking unnecessary risks, but like, okay, I don't need to have the corner booth. I'm not in uniform. Nobody knows I'm even here. And
I had to do the same thing. I had to intentionally sit with my door or my back to the door and think,
right,
I'm fine. No one's going
Right.
to come busting through that door
Right.
right now. Yeah.
It's like the president of the United States deciding, I'm going to make a surprise visit to this restaurant, and the Secret Service is, oh my God, they don't even know he's coming. It's
Yeah.
like, calm down, it's going to be all right.
So after you retired from Aurora, you took on another project, which was participating. Well, you took on a bunch of projects, but one is that your wife Sarah is the president of Code 4 Counseling, and so it's I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that, but also what I wonder, as a cop being married to a therapist, how much are you the guinea pig? But also I think the mission of Code 4 Counseling, which is again one of the original reasons I wanted to have you on, and we're just now getting to talking about it after some great conversation. Tell us about Code 4 Counseling and what you're trying to accomplish there, and then also this program at Colorado State University, which I find fascinating. My alma mater, as I mentioned to you earlier, a master's in military and emergency responder psychology.
Yep.
A fascinating idea. So I got two questions, so we'll take them separately. But Code 4 Counseling, tell us about that and what you do with your wife, Sarah.
Yeah. So just real quick, one of the things I did before I retired is I really thought long and hard about my retirement. I knew I was financially ready, but I wasn't ready up here. And I've known too many people who have gotten tired of the job and retired. And then later you run into them and they said it was the biggest mistake they ever made because they had no plan. So I really wanted to make sure before I retired, I had a plan. And so I told Sarah, create a new master's program, which she did. No. So she created this program with CSU Global. It's an emergency management, emergency responder and military psychology. It's towards getting your licensure. But every class is geared towards working with responders and military and their families. It's the only program of its kind in the country right now. And it went live last August. There are about 60 people in the program, and I'm hearing probably another 20 more. I thought the first few months that the school was actually going to cut the program because they were like, we don't really need to do this. And now they're like, holy crap, we're getting a lot of folks that want to do this. And it's really cool. And most of the people who are in the class or in the program are responders or have been responders or military. And so they've been there and done that. And so to think in like a year and a half, you're going to have people coming out, getting their licensure to be therapists, and they're going to be already culturally competent. And so when cops go through a shooting or have the responder marital issues and everything else, they're going to be able to go to somebody who can say, yeah, I kind of get it. I've been there. And I think that's so important. And so, and then I answered that question first, but it corresponds with Code 4 counseling. And so Sarah has been a public safety psychologist for almost 15 years. She responded to the Aurora theater shooting. She's been to, more officer involved shooting incidents that I'm sure she can remember. She's been to, she responded up with us up in the Boulder situation, lots of line of duty death responses. Deals with all responders and their families, does a lot of marital counseling with responders. And so I know for her, she's looking and she's got great therapists that work for her, as do a number of other public safety firms. But I know a lot of them are really looking forward to now thinking, oh my gosh, in a year and a half, I'm going to be able to hire some culturally competent therapists who will come with instant credibility of having been there. So right now we're doing a lot of training. We just did a week of peer support training for Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Yesterday, Code 4 and Colorado Fallen Hero, we did a line of duty death preparation training for chiefs and sheriffs because most have never experienced that. And so we want to make sure they're as prepared as possible. And we were fortunate to have the chief from Boulder come down and actually do the opening for us. And that was really cool. So we're doing a lot of different things right now. It's been really fun. Retirement planning. Again, we don't necessarily get into the financial part. We're up here. Like, are you really ready to, take this next step? And what are you going to do when all of a sudden the phone stops ringing and people stop calling you chief and all those kind of things?
It's a very valid part of the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you see it with people who, go out on medical, get injured halfway through their career and they have to leave. They don't have a choice. And that struggle and that identity. And if there isn't an outlet or if there isn't a separate identity as dad or coach or musician or whatever it is, that identity you just get wiped out. It gets taken from you. And those people struggle. So it's a very important part of that piece. And I'm glad that you brought that up.
I'll tell you, if you haven't, I'll tell you, if you have not already, I would highly encourage you to have, I don't know if you've heard of Dan Bright. I'd really encourage you to have him on one of your shows. Dan is the Douglas County Wellness Coordinator, but Dan 4 years ago was a SWAT dog who was shot and paralyzed, and he's in a wheelchair. And he has completely repurposed himself, incredibly passionate about wellness. And now he's in this program as well, the CSU Global program. And to think about how his experience is going to especially being able to work with responders who have disabling injuries, and thinking, oh my God, my life is over. And here's a guy that, and he'll tell you publicly, he was really in the dumps. He was, knocking on the door, from a depression standpoint, and now has really just shine. And I'll tell you, getting him on your show sometime would be absolutely amazing. He's just a phenomenal guy. And then we have another guy from another agency who lost his eye, and about a year and a half ago. And again, what am I going to do with my life? And then he's in our program and thinking same thing. I mean, here's a guy he's going to make a difference out there as a therapist.
No, it's great when anyone can, take an adversity, but more importantly, turn around and lend a hand to the next generation of people who are coming in. And something that I'm so inspired by right now, and this will be, I guess, where I wrap it up with you today, is we are in there's no question we're in probably the most challenging time of professional policing that there's ever been, right? Ever since the transition from patronage to professionalism, whatever you want to call it now, neo-professionalism, there is no more challenging event than what we're experiencing right now in terms of how we interact with the community. The community's trust in us, officers trust in each other, officers beginning to, I see the strain. You just see it on social media. You see cops off-gassing that stress into something inappropriate, like an Instagram post or a Twitter post or a Facebook post, and then getting themselves in trouble as a result. There's a lot to be concerned about right now. But what is amazing to me is on a daily basis, I get an email or a Facebook message or an Instagram DM from somebody who is so excited to come into the profession and they just can't contain themselves. They're so excited. They want to learn everything they can about it. And regardless of what's going on out there, they want to go in and take that oath, wear that badge, and be of service to others. And those are the people that I'm inspired by, because they don't have to be here. They don't have the pension yet. They don't have the golden handcuffs. They're not vested yet. They could do anything they want, yet still people are being called to service. And so I'd be curious to know what your message is to, if you had, what you do now, a microphone to talk to thousands of cops all over the world who are all experiencing these things in this challenging environment. What are the things you would want to say to them, to help them revisit their purpose like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I will say to the current cops who are experiencing this, this just overwhelming, just the fear of all the different kinds of policies, and feeling like well, I'll never be able to do policing again, and wanting to get out. I'll tell them, don't discourage the young ones from wanting to do this job, because number one, I need cops in my neighborhood, and I want good cops in my neighborhood. And
right.
And and I'll see Facebook posts and stuff telling people, you should leave the profession. And for those of you thinking about it, don't get into the profession. And well, you know what? That's not going to do us any good, because I want a safe neighborhood and a safe community. And you have some folks out there who, with everything going on, and I saw the same thing, even to a little bit different level, but I saw the same thing even right after Rodney King. Yes, I'm that old. I was on the streets then. That people were, the cops were telling the young guys, why you don't want to do this? Go be a firefighter. But if this job is a calling, and you should follow your heart, you should follow your calling. You don't want to take a job just because, well, okay, I can get paid to, do A, B, or C. And I would tell the people who are thinking about going into this profession, number one, thank you for thinking about it. And if there's ever anything I can do to help answer questions on how to navigate that, I'm always happy to do that. But do go in with your eyes wide open and understand and really ask yourself, why is it you want to do this job? If it's because you want the authority and the prestige, don't do it, because you're going to get disappointed really quick and you're going to find yourself into some trouble probably. But if it's really because you want to serve and you understand the risks and all those kinds of things, I my hats off to you for wanting to continue to do this job. People ask me if I could go to 21 years of age tomorrow and knowing everything I know, would I do this job again? And I would do it in a heartbeat. I would absolutely do it in a heartbeat. Because I think it's the opportunities I've had and I've seen so many others have. This is the best seat in the house. I mean, it's, you get to do things that 99.9% of the population never get to do or see, and the difference you make. And even though when you don't necessarily see that difference, and even though you don't have people writing letters of, commendation or the supervisor patting you on the back, you are making a difference out there. And the ones who are still out there right now fighting the good fight, they're continuing to make that difference. And I always tell folks who call me to say, I'm really thinking about leaving the profession because of everything going on. And then we drill down, well, why, and what are you going to do? And then it's like, well, I don't know. Okay, well, let's go back and let's figure out, why did you decide you wanted to do this job in the first place? What was it that drew you to the job? Well, it was helping people. It was making a difference. Okay, well, then renew that. Yeah, it's going to be harder. You're going to have phones stuck in your face every single time you're on a call. You're going to have people, not give you the benefit of the doubt now because you are a cop. But harness what you had there before, and remember that the majority of this country appreciate what you're doing and respect what you're doing, and they never want to be in a situation where they call 911 and get put on hold until they rely on you and they rely on us. So I don't know if that really answered your question, and I apologize. That was kind of a rambling way of getting around to that, but I just really feel like, it's so easy for folks, and I'll tell folks, I'll tell cops also, it's really easy to see all this crap on social media about how bad policing is, and everyone quit, and don't look at that stuff, and don't. It's just, you're still going out there and you're doing your job and you're doing it right. It's a different time though. So.
No, yeah, and you answered. I think the key there is returning to that purpose and sense of purpose and why you chose service in the first place, and understanding that, really, you mentioned Rodney King, but even before that, policing has always been in a constant state of change in some way, right? We're always progressing. We're always community expectations are always changing. So the idea that policing is dead, or the way it used to be is dead, is like, there is no used to be the way. It's always changing. If you take 2 steps back, you'll see that from when you started your career to now, it's changed. And then you go 40 years back and it's changed. It's changed sometimes by the month. And the flexibility, we have to learn how to be flexible with our careers and understand that though the tactics might change, the mission of service and the mission of protecting the public remains the same. And
Absolutely.
so that is where we get hung up, is in the change of tactics, not in the change of purpose. And I think you answered that well. Nick, I appreciate your time so much today. This has been a great conversation. I could go on and on and on, but out of respect for your time, I won't. But hopefully we can schedule a round 2 at some point. Can you tell us where people can learn more about Code 4 counseling and also the Colorado Fallen Hero Foundation?
Yeah. So as far as Code 4 counseling, it's code4counseling.com. My contact information, including my cell, is on there. So if anyone has any questions or they just want to chat, we get calls from all over the country on those kinds of things. If they have questions about the CSU Global Program, as far as that counseling program, I'm happy to take calls on that, and then I can refer them to either Sarah or the admissions folks at CSU Global. But I can, as a student, and just trust me, even though she's the program manager, I get no love. I get no love from those instructors. I'm like, who my wife is, and they're like, yeah. So but it's a good program. And then also Colorado Fallen Heroes Foundation is cofallen.org. heroes.org. And that program is it's our line of duty death response program through Colorado. We pretty much stole everything, all our ideas from Behind the Badge in Washington, which I was part of for many years.
We'll put links in the show notes to all of those as well, so people can check them out. There's a lot to dig into on all of those sites, and great work being done in each of those. So, Nick, thanks for your time today, and thanks for being with us.
Great questions. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode with Nick Metz. Hope you were as impressed with him as I was. A true cop's cop and a guy that has his heart in the right place, but also wears it on his sleeve. You know, I so often at the end of the show talk about how it relates to our badges, not the one on our chest, but the badges within us, our beliefs, actions, discipline, goals, emotions, and service. You know, and Nick is a great example of someone who is really in alignment on a lot of those things. You know, his beliefs, and the ones we talked about on the show, the belief about what's right and doing what's right, even when the public and elected officials and the bosses want you to do something different, but following his own internal compass about what to do, and then acting on that, and then defending his decision, not so much from justifying it or making excuses, but just knowing that he was coming from the right place. He has certainly the discipline to consider all incoming factors or evaluate all possible issues or outcomes or options to him when he's evaluating or working with his troops. You know, I like the story about how he went into the precinct and apologized to all of the shifts. And that took a lot of discipline to follow through on his core values. You know, he could have just let it slide, like he said, and people would have forgotten about it. But it really showed true discipline in his core values that he took it upon himself to go in there and apologize. And I thought that was a great story. You know, goals. He clearly had goals throughout his career. He promoted up and he moved around, moved to Aurora. And even now in retirement, he's busier than he's ever been, working on, becoming a counselor for first responders, teaching peer support, teaching the things he's learned in his life. You know, he's certainly emotions, a man who is able to tap into those, understand those, recognize those. And he's a great example in that sense. And then service, you know, a man who spent 30 years at Seattle and then another 3.5 or so, more than that at Aurora. And no one would find it offensive or wrong, improper if he just retired and went fishing. But he retired, and the first thing he did was start a counseling service with his wife, who's a trained professional psychologist, and pursuing now a master's degree so he can participate more in that stuff, and working with the Colorado Fallen Heroes Foundation. Like he's a man who's clearly all about service. And so I thank Nick Metz for being on the show and for exemplifying our badges so clearly. All right, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about before you go. It's absolutely free. We have launched Tactical Tuesdays, a free weekly email where we bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. Maybe about a book I want to share, gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, a question I might have for you, or anything else that I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check out the show notes for the episode. You'll find it there. I promise we won't sell your number or spam your email address. Now, before we wrap up, I have another challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by this conversation with Nick, I want to challenge you right now. Take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode. I want you to share it with 3 friends, people you think need to hear it, what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. Please leave a comment with your review if you have time. If you got a couple extra seconds, just jot something in there. It really helps us spread the word around the show. Of course, we have our Facebook group at the Squad Room. You can join that as well. And I want to thank our sponsors for today, officerprivacy.com. If you're cleaning up your name on the internet, let's make it harder for criminals to find you. And that's really important. Check out the deal, officerprivacy.com/the Squad Room. You'll get a free USB data blocker and a free month of monitoring when you sign up. I also want to thank Hard to Kill Fitness. You can check them out at hardtokillfitness.co. And if you go to thesquadroom.net/support, you'll see other companies that have been very supportive of us, including Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, Audible, and Signature Coins, among others. And now, if you're looking for a ballistic helmet that fits your needs and won't break your bank and it exceeds NIJ standards, make sure you check out our buddies over at Hardhead Veterans. You can use coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet from them. They do excellent work. I just had to wear mine this last week, and it was quite comfy. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.